Today, we're going to tackle one of the biggest, most dramatic transformations of the 20th century. We're talking about how Russia, a country ruled by czars for hundreds of years, was turned completely upside down and remade into the world's very first communist state. It's an incredible story of war, hunger, and revolution.
And that really is the heart of it, isn't it? That's the question we're going to dig into. How does something that seems so permanent, a dynasty that's been around for 300 years, just poof, collapse in what feels like the blink of an eye?
Well, the answer is basically a perfect storm. By 1917, you had this combination of disasters all hitting at once. You had the unbelievable pressure of World War I, you have people literally starving in the streets, and you have a ruler who seems to have no clue what's actually happening with his own people. All of it pushed the Russian Empire right to the absolute brink.
So let's start there. Let's look at the final, chaotic days of the Tsar, with this entire nation just teetering on the edge of collapse. You know, to really get what was going on, you have to understand this one key idea: autocracy. Russia wasn't a democracy, not even close. It was a place where one single person, Tsar Nicholas II, had total, absolute, unquestioned power over 150 million people. What he said went, period.
And this right here, this shows you how everything was just falling apart. World War I wasn't some far-off conflict. It was a disaster that was touching every single part of life. We're talking millions of casualties. And while that's happening on the front, people back home are starving. The soldiers themselves don't even have proper shoes or weapons. You can just imagine how hope was completely draining away. And in the middle of all this chaos, what was the Tsar doing? Well, he was dangerously out of touch. And this really gets to the core of the problem. He just didn't see, or didn't want to see, that his people weren't just a little unhappy, they were truly desperate. And that kind of desperation was about to explode.
And exploded it did. That desperation finally boiled over into revolution. This brings us to part one of the story, the People's Revolt.
Now, this wasn't some carefully planned military takeover, not at first. It was a spontaneous eruption from everywhere. You had women in the streets demanding bread for their families. You had factory workers just walking off the job. Farmers were protesting for food. It was this massive, popular uprising that just completely overwhelmed the authorities.
And this shows you just how fast a system of power can totally unravel. First, the police can't handle the sheer number of protesters. And then, and this is the absolute crucial moment, the military is ordered to shoot at the crowds, and instead, they switch sides. They join the revolution. Once that happens, it's over. The Tsar has no one left to protect him, and he and his family are captured.
But you know, getting rid of a czar is one thing. Actually fixing a country that's completely broken, that's a whole other challenge. A temporary government steps in, but they inherit this impossible situation. The war is still going on, people are still hungry, none of the core problems have been solved. And this massive power vacuum just opens the door for someone else to step in.
And that's when a new, much more organized, and much more radical group makes its move. This brings us to Lenin's Communist Revolution and the rise of a totally new kind of power.
The idea that was driving this next revolution was communism. Now, in theory, the idea was that the government would control absolutely everything, the economy, political power, you name it. But it would do all of this for the good of the regular citizens. It was a powerful promise. So, this is where you see the huge gap between the idea and the reality. The promise of a government working for the citizens became, in practice, a one-party dictatorship where the Communist Party made all the decisions for the people. Control of the economy meant no more private businesses, no more capitalism, basically shutting the country off from the rest of the world.
And the group that made this happen, the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin, they were absolutely ruthless. They didn't just take power. They made sure the old power could never come back. They executed the Tsar and his entire family, his wife, his kids. It was a brutal, shocking act that sent a clear message. There was no going back. They were in total control now.
So, with the old Russia gone, Lenin starts building something completely new from the ashes. This is the birth of the Soviet Union. Right away, the first thing they do is a total rebrand. The country isn't Russia anymore, it's now the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, the USSR. And this wasn't just a name change, it was a declaration to the entire world that a new kind of country had been born, the first one ever to be built on communist ideas. One of Lenin's first, and most important, decisions was to get Russia out of World War I, but the price for peace was staggering. To get Germany to stop fighting, the new Soviet Union had to give up huge chunks of its land that was full of farms and valuable resources. It was a desperate move, but that's how desperate they were.
After Lenin died, power fell to a man who would come to define the Soviet Union for decades, Joseph Stalin. And his rule was going to be one of absolute, terrifying control. Stalin's legacy is just full of these brutal contradictions. On one hand, he dragged the USSR into the modern world, building it into an industrial and military giant that was strong enough to help defeat Nazi Germany in World War II. But the human cost was horrifying. He ruled with an iron fist. He caused famines that killed millions. He created a state of constant fear. And he politically destroyed, or just plain killed, anyone who dared to speak out. And the cost of that war, it's almost impossible to comprehend. The Soviet Union lost more than 20 million people in World War II. Just take a second and let that number sink in. It's a level of death and destruction that permanently scarred the nation and changed the course of history.
Which brings us all the way back to the biggest question of all. The revolution started with people in the streets crying out for peace and for bread. It was supposed to be a revolution for the people. So how did that same movement lead to a brutal dictatorship and decades of fear? That's the central haunting paradox of this entire story.